Hey Reddit, I'm Anna, 26, and I recently found out something disgusting about my mother and her new husband. For years, I thought she had just moved on after my dad's death. It hurt, sure, but I told myself that people grieve differently, that she was just trying to rebuild her life. I was so wrong, because the truth? She didn't just move on. She married a con artist, and together, they were planning to steal millions. I should have known something was off the second she sent me away. After my dad passed, I was just shoved aside. She told me it was for my own good, that I needed a fresh start, that my aunt and uncle could take care of me better. But at 16, I wasn't stupid. I knew she was just trying to get rid of me. And the moment I was out of the picture, she married a man I had never even met before, just months after my father's funeral. At first, I thought she just wanted a new life. She barely called me, barely checked in. It was like I had just ceased to exist in her world. And honestly, I was fine with that, because my aunt and uncle, they treated me better than she ever did. But a few months ago, everything changed, because I got a call from my cousin, and what she told me, it shattered everything I thought I knew. It was a random Tuesday when my cousin Lisa called. "Hey," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Have you talked to your mom recently?" I frowned. No. What?" She hesitated. Then, "I think you need to come home." That set me on edge immediately, because Lisa never told me to come home. She knew how bad things were with my mother. She knew I had no reason to go back. But the way she said it, the nervousness in her voice, it made my stomach twist. "What's going on?" I demanded. She took a deep breath. Then, in the calmest voice possible, she dropped the bomb. "Your mom and her husband are trying to sell your dad's company, and they're trying to cut you out completely." I felt sick, because that was impossible. I owned half of that company, and if they were selling it without my knowledge, that meant one thing. They were stealing from me. I packed a bag that night, bought a plane ticket, and the next morning, I was standing outside my mother's house, my heart racing, because I had one mission: find out what the hell was going on, and stop it before it was too late. I stood outside my mother's house, staring at the front door like it might bite me. I hadn't been here in years, not since she had shoved me aside after my dad died. Not since she sent me away, so she could live her perfect new life with her perfect new husband. But now, I was back, and I wasn't leaving without answers. I knocked. No response. I knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door swung open, and standing there, looking like I had just ruined his day, was my mother's husband, Richard. He barely even hid his annoyance. "Anna," he said flatly, "didn't expect to see you." I forced a smile. "Yeah, I bet." His eyes flickered to my suitcase. "Staying long?" "That depends," I said coolly. "Are you going to let me inside, or should I just call the cops now?" His expression tightened, because he knew exactly why I was here, and I wasn't going anywhere. Reluctantly, he stepped aside. I walked in, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. The house smelled different. It didn't feel like home anymore. Everything was new, expensive, flashy, completely different from how my dad kept it. And sitting on the couch, sipping from a crystal glass of wine, was my mother. She barely even looked surprised to see me, just raised an eyebrow and said, "Well, this is a surprise." I laughed, because this was so typical. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't guilty. She was just annoyed that I was here. I dropped my bag on the floor. "Cut the crap," I said. "I know what you're doing." Her expression didn't even change. "And what exactly am I doing?" I took a deep breath. "You're trying to sell Dad's company." Silence. Then, she just sighed, like this was all so exhausting for her. "Anna," she said, already exasperated. "It's complicated." I laughed again. "No, it's actually not. You're trying to sell something that isn't yours to sell." Richard crossed his arms. "Well, technically," I whirled on him. Don't even try it." Because I knew exactly what he was going to say. Something about how Mom was Dad's wife, how she was entitled to his assets, how she had every right to make decisions about his company. But the problem? She wasn't the only one who owned it, because legally, half of it belonged to me. I turned back to my mother. "You think I wouldn't find out?" I snapped. "You really thought you could just erase me?" Mom rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic." I actually felt my blood pressure spike. Because dramatic? Was she serious? They were trying to steal my inheritance, and I was the dramatic one. I took a step forward, my voice deadly calm. I want to see the paperwork. Richard's smug expression flickered. What paperwork? He asked innocently. I smirked. Oh, I don't know. Maybe the fraudulent contracts you've been putting together to cut me out? Mom sighed again, setting down her wine glass like she was so done with me. Anna, sweetheart. Don't. I held up a hand. Don't call me sweetheart. You lost that right a long time ago. She flinched. For the first time since I walked in, she actually looked uncomfortable. Good. Richard, however, wasn't backing down. He was too confident, too sure that I couldn't do anything about it. He leaned against the kitchen counter, smirking. You think you're entitled to something just because you share a last name? I narrowed my eyes. No, Richard. I think I'm entitled to something because my father left it to me. His smirk wavered, and that's when I knew they hadn't just tried to sell the company. They had altered the paperwork. They had tried to erase my name from everything. And that was fraud. I pulled out my phone because I wasn't just here to yell at them. I was here to end this. I hope you two have good lawyers, I said, tapping my screen. Mom's eyes widened. What are you doing? I smiled, calling mine. And just like that, everything changed because they had planned for a lot of things, but they had never planned for me fighting back. Richard's smirk disappeared immediately. My mother, who had been so smug just a second ago, lunged for my phone. Anna, wait, she said, her voice suddenly softer. Fake, but I wasn't falling for it. I stepped back, raising a hand. Don't even try it. She froze, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't in control anymore. I was. Richard, however, wasn't ready to back down. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said, still trying to act calm and rational. There's no fraud here, just a misunderstanding. I laughed. A misunderstanding? I repeated. You mean like how you misunderstood the fact that I legally own half of this company? His jaw tightened. Yeah, that's what I thought. Mom sighed dramatically, pressing her fingers to her temple like she was so exhausted by all of this. Anna, listen, she said. This isn't what you think. We weren't trying to steal from you. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, then why was I never contacted about the sale? She hesitated, and in that moment, I knew there was no explanation, no way out of this for them, because they had been caught red-handed. Richard straightened his posture, deciding to try a different angle. Look, he said, crossing his arms. Even if you do own half, what are you really going to do with it? You don't run businesses, Anna. You don't have the experience to keep it going. I felt my blood boil, because that was exactly what they thought of me. They saw me as nothing. Some forgotten teenager they sent away. Someone too dumb to understand how any of this worked. But they didn't know who I had become. They didn't know that for the last 10 years, I had worked alongside my uncle, learning everything there was to know about business. And they sure as hell didn't know that I had already spoken to my dad's lawyer. So I just smiled. And then I dropped the bomb. I already spoke to Mr. Keaton. Silence. Mom's face drained of color. Richard? He actually flinched, because they knew exactly who I was talking about. Mr. Keaton was my dad's lawyer. He had been handling his estate since before I was even born. And when I called him, he had told me everything. The sale? It was already in motion. Richard had been handling the paperwork behind the scenes, making sure I was never contacted. The only reason I found out? Because Lisa overheard them talking about it. If she hadn't, I wouldn't have even known until it was too late. Mom swallowed hard. Anna, she started, but I cut her off. I don't want to hear it. I snapped. I don't want to hear another excuse. Another lie. Another bullshit story about how this was all a misunderstanding. Richard held up a hand. We can negotiate. I laughed out loud. Negotiate? Are you serious? I took a step closer. There's no negotiating, Richard. The only thing you're going to do is undo the sale, give me access to all the documents, and step the hell away from my father's business. His jaw clenched. Or what? And that's when I pulled out the folder. I had printed everything. The fraudulent contracts, the emails between him and the buyers, even a recording of my lawyer explaining how illegal this was. I tossed it onto the table in front of them. Richard's face went blank. Mom? She actually looked like she was going to faint, because this was checkmate. They were screwed. You have until the end of the day, I said. To do what? Richard muttered, flipping through the pages, his hands shaking. To fix this, I said, or I take all of this straight to the authorities. Mom let out a sharp gasp. Anna, you wouldn't. I met her eyes, cold and unblinking. Try me. And that was when I saw it. The moment they realized they lost. Richard was the first to cave. He let out a long breath, rubbing a hand down his face. Fine, he muttered. We'll call the buyers. We'll stop the sale. Mom snapped her head toward him, her eyes wide. Richard, there's no getting out of this, he muttered, shaking his head. She has everything. And he was right. I had all the proof I needed. If they tried anything else, they wouldn't just lose the company. They'd go to prison. Mom turned back to me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her expression was a mix of anger and humiliation, because she had never expected me to fight back. She had never expected me to win. But now, she had no choice but to face the consequences. By the time I left, the deal was already being canceled. Richard and Mom had to swallow their pride and explain to the buyers that the sale was off the table. And me? I walked out of that house knowing one thing for certain. I was never coming back. Not to them. Not to this house. Not to the family that had abandoned me. They had spent years treating me like I was nothing. And now, they had to live with the fact that I was the only reason they weren't behind bars. Blocking my mother's number should have been the end of it. But of course, she wasn't the type to let go quietly. Even after I exposed their fraud and forced them to cancel the sale, she and Richard weren't done trying to manipulate me. At first, it was small things, emails from fake accounts trying to guilt trip me. You'll regret this when I'm gone. After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat your mother? I don't know how you can sleep at night knowing you destroyed our family. Blah, blah, blah. I ignored every single one because I knew exactly what she was doing. And when that didn't work, she escalated. The next move was turning the family against me. I woke up one morning to my phone blowing up. Texts, calls, missed voicemails from relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. They weren't checking in. They were attacking me. Aunt Linda, how could you do this to your own mother? Uncle Rob, your father would be ashamed of you. Grandma, I don't even recognize you anymore. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Because of course, she made herself the victim. She had probably gone crying to them about how I had turned against my own family, how I had ruined her life, how I was being selfish and cruel, leaving out the part where she tried to steal millions from me. I debated responding, setting the record straight. But then, I realized something. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to convince anyone of the truth, because the truth was already in motion. And my mother? She was about to get the biggest wake-up call of her life. Even though I had stopped the sale, I still needed to fix the damage Richard had done. So, I hired a forensic accountant. What he found was worse than I expected. Richard had siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars from the company over the last few years. Money that should have gone into employee salaries, investments, and company growth. Instead, it went into his luxury lifestyle, private vacations, secret bank accounts, a car that wasn't even registered in his name. And the best part? Mom knew. She had signed off on multiple transactions, which meant she wasn't just complicit. She was an active participant in the fraud. The moment I had proof of their crimes, I did something they never expected. I reported them, not just to my lawyers, to the IRS, to the police, to every authority that needed to be involved. Because if they thought they could just steal from my father's company and walk away unscathed, they were about to get a reality check. It didn't take long before everything collapsed around them. One day, Richard was posting photos of himself on a yacht, acting like he was untouchable. The next, he was being arrested for tax fraud. My mom? She tried play dumb, tried to distance herself from him. But the paper trail? It didn't lie. She was just as guilty as he was. And the moment she realized that, she did what she always did. She called me, begging, pleading. But I didn't answer, because she made her choices. And now, she had to live with them. The only time I saw her, after everything went down, was in the courtroom. She looked different, smaller, like she had finally realized she wasn't in control anymore. When our eyes met, she didn't smile, didn't cry. She just stared at me, like she was finally seeing me for the first time. Like she finally understood that she had lost me forever. When the trial was over, she tried to approach me. Anna, she said softly, please. I looked at her, at the woman who gave birth to me, at the woman who betrayed me more times than I could count. and I felt nothing. I took a slow breath. Then, I said the last words I would ever say to her. You made your choice. Now live with it. Then I walked away. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. The company thrived. With Richard and my mother gone, I was finally able to rebuild everything they destroyed. I expanded. I hired people who actually cared about the business. And slowly, I turned it into something Dad would have been proud of. Mom, she tried to reach out again. A letter this time, talking about how she missed me, how she wanted to fix things, how she didn't mean for it to happen this way. I didn't respond, because some betrayals aren't forgivable. Instead, I focused on my life, my company, my real family, the people who stood by me when no one else did. And for the first time in years, I finally felt at peace, because I had taken back everything they tried to steal from me. And I had won.